Well, in the 19th century then in England, there was great renewed interest in the sequence, in the sonnet sequence and in other kinds of lyric sequence. The ability to tell a story through lyric, which is a kind of an odd thing to want to do or to be able to do in poetry. Normally the lyric utterance is thought about as being singular, being tied into a particular moment, a transient or a passing moment. But of course that's not necessarily the case whenever you're trying to tell a story. So there are all kinds of returns to these kinds of sonnet sequences that were so popular in the Renaissance. And these started again with Wordsworth's writing of sonnet sequences, of Tennyson's writing of long sequences in a poem like In Memoriam, or indeed Maud, which tells a story again of a tragic love affair ending up in war and destruction. But there are other sequences as well with a domestic or a much more familial impetus, like George Meredith's Modern Love, which is often thought to be a great influence on Joyce. But also in the background there are other sequences as well, German song sequences, the Lieder of Schubert and of Schumann, and indeed the work that was coming out of France. And that work that was coming out of France, which we would now consider to be, and we now call symbolist poetry, was again of immense influence on the young Joyce. Remember, this was a brilliant young student. He was a polyglot who could speak many different languages and indeed sing in German and Italian and in French, and was also becoming saturated, as so many people were in the 1890s into the beginning of the 20th century, in this symbolist poetry. The main proselytizer for this symbolist poetry was the English critic Arthur Symons, who had come under the influence of William Butler Yeats in the 1890s and dedicated his famous book, The Symbolist Movement in Poetry, to Yeats. That initially had been called the Decadent Movement in poetry, but under Yeats's influence, Symons had changed it to the Symbolist Movement. And that symbolist lyric or that symbolist sequence is something which was manifest so strongly through the writing of Yeats in the 1890s. So in 1899, Yeats brought together a number of his lyrics into a great sequence called The Wind Among the Reeds. And The Wind Among the Reeds again tells a story through lyric of the relationship of the poet with two women. Both of them, we know who they were in Yeats's own biography, a woman called Olivia Shakespeare, and also the famous love of his life, Maud Gonne. And these various love affairs are told through these stories, and stories which, published in 1899, had this strange apocalyptic import, as if they were coming to the end of the time, because of course people thought that 1899 was actually the millennium, and it has this strange millennial apocalyptic import. Of course the world didn't end in 1899, it certainly didn't end in 1999 either, whether we partied in 1999 or not. But following on from that, the question for poetry is, what exactly are you going to do with this? Where it seemed to have as if it had come to an end. Thus, James Joyce in chamber music in 1901, positing for himself a literary or a poetic problem, somehow thinking as if that poetic problem had come to an end.